We'll get started with our next topic, which is Selenium. So we'll go over some basics, and then we'll go over all the different commands which are present in Selenium. We'll look over a few scenarios, how you handle those scenarios. And then later we will go into the project mode or framework mode. Okay. So what is Selenium? Well, it's a very popular open source automation tool for web applications. It can be used across different browsers and platforms. So it supports almost all the browsers and all the platforms. There are three main components in Selenium. So there is WebDriver, which is basically an API which allows you to programmatically interact with different browsers. So that is the way you automate your browser actions, right, which you perform on the application. And then there is IDE, which is a record and playback tool. It's mostly not recommended for automation. It can be used for small prototype or if you want to do any POC kind of thing. Then you can use the record and playback tool, which is called the IDE. And then there is Selenium Grid, which is basically used to run your tests on different browsers and platforms on any remote servers, right? So these are the three main components. Mostly we'll be looking at Selenium WebDriver. We'll also look at Selenium Grid, but I'm not going to go through Selenium IDE in this particular training. So an interesting fact, if you don't already know this, so from where the Selenium name came from. So initially, when they were developing this tool, there was another automation tool which was being developed by Mercury, right, which was a rival company at that time. So the creator of Selenium, which was Huggins, he actually dropped an email to his team saying that mercury can be mercury poisoning can be cured by the selenium supplements, right? So that was a kind of a humorous email he sent to his team, which his team received, and they took it little seriously. And after that, they actually kept the tool name as Selenium. Before that, it was something else, right? So that is how the Selenium name came into the picture, right? So there was some basic background about Selenium. Now, in order to work with Selenium, we should also understand its architecture. Okay, so this is the architecture of a Selenium WebDriver, and there are different components inside this, right? So there is something called language bindings, which is basically the libraries which are present for different um, different languages, right? So whatever you write in a particular language, these are nothing but the language bindings. So you have got for Java, C#, Python, for every other language which Selenium supports. Okay. In between, there is a JSON Wire Protocol. It's nothing but it is a way of communicating. These language bindings use this JSON Wire Protocol over REST API to connect to these browser drivers, right? So there are browser drivers and there are real browsers which you see. So both browser drivers and real browsers have got their own HTTP server, right? So they communicate with each other with a HTTP server. So both have got that and they communicate with each other. So the process is like this, right? So every statement you write using any language binding or in any language, it is converted to a URL, right? So by the JSON Wire Protocol over HTTP. So every statement is converted into a URL and it is sent over to the browser driver. Okay. So once this HTTP request is received by the browser driver over the HTTP server, it processes that request, right? And it passes to the real browser, which again is a server, right? So this request is goes to the HTTP server, which is the browser. It receives that request and then it processes that request, right? So which means the commands which you have written in any particular language are then executed on the browser. So once these commands are executed on the browser, the actions are performed. Then some response is generated, right, by the browser drive by the browser server, and that response is sent back to the browser driver. Again, it is sent back through the JSON wire protocol to back to your IDE or wherever you are writing your code, right? So which is the UI. That time you will see the response in the form of either some console output, right, or whatever it is. So this is the whole process how all your Selenium WebDriver scripts are processed from one component to other, and this is how you communicate whatever you write in a particular language is then communicated with the browser drivers and the real browsers. So that is the reason why we use a browser driver whenever we are writing any Selenium scripts. We have to first download the browser driver, right? And then we write our Selenium statements in any particular language like Java. So those get executed on a real browser like Chrome or Firefox or IE. Let's go on the most important part then, how do we find our web elements on the web page, right? So whenever you try to write any Selenium script, you have to first try to identify your web elements on the page, right? And there are two ways of it. I mean, Selenium provides two methods: find element and find elements. Okay, so find element is used to identify a single element on the web page. So even if there are multiple elements which are matching your identifier, still it will return the first matching element, okay, out of those. And that could be based on different criteria. Find elements method will return you a list of web elements on the page which are matching your locators. Okay, so this is how a typical statement looks like when you use a find element method. So driver, which is the browser driver, right? It could be the Chrome driver, the Firefox driver, or the IE driver. And then there is the find element method, which is the method provided by the WebDriver. Then there is a by class, right, which provides mechanism to locate different elements. And this by class has got different locator types. So it could be a ID, it could be a name, it could be a Xpath, CSS. There are different types of locators. We'll look at them after in some time, right? So inside this by.id, then you will pass the actual locator value through which your web element will be identified. Okay. And once your web element is identified, then you need to pass a method, what kind of operation you want to perform on that web element. Okay. So the click method, this is the method provided by the WebDriver. So if you want to click on this particular element, you need to pass the click element, click method. Okay. So, okay, so this is the Chrome browser, and this is the default Google page, right? So there are different ways of identifying a particular element, right? So if I want to identify this search text box on this particular page, okay? So Google provides the developer tools through which you can basically identify any particular web element on the page. Okay. So when you right click on any particular element, there is something called inspect. Okay. You can also press F12 on your browser and that will launch the developer tools. Now there are different things which are present in the developer tools, right? So you can do some performance testing in the performance tab. You can check the network to see what are the API requests which is going into the browser or into the web application. Request and response, your network, different network parameters, right? Memory parameters. So there are different things to this developer tools, which is present on almost every browser. Out of that, there is this elements, right? And this is basically showing you the HTML tree, right? So every web page is in the form of an HTML page. Okay, so and there could be another again JavaScript and CSS and lot of other styles which may be involved inside this, but after all it is an HTML page. And then every HTML page has got a HTML tree, right? And that HTML tree has got different web elements. Okay, so this is the top HTML page heading. It will have a heading, it will have the body. Okay, so every element can be identified by all these HTML web elements which are present on this page. Okay, so if you want to identify any particular element like this text box, right? When you do an inspect, it shows you or highlights you that particular element in the HTML tree. Okay, now that HTML element contains different properties. Okay, so it is inside this starting and closing tag. Okay, and every element will be identified by its properties and it is of a specific type. Okay, so for example, this text box where you can type some text, so that will be a input tag. Okay, so it's of type input. Similarly, a button or a link, right? So a button would be of be a button type, or it can also be an input type, but it could be also be a button type. Similarly, a link, it could be having a tag A, which means it's a hyperlink. Okay, so every element has got its own type, and then there are other properties which basically help you identify that particular element on the page. Okay, now the challenge here is in automation, you need to uniquely identify a particular element. Okay, so you can't just grab any particular property and its value to identify a particular element. You have also need to make sure that it is unique across the page. Otherwise, if you pass any property value which is not unique, then there could be many other elements which have got these properties and values, right? So the WebDriver then cannot decide which element it wants to click. It may click on the first matching element, but that would not be the appropriate output which you are expecting, right? So you should always try to find a unique property and value, or then use other ways which are present in Selenium through which you can identify that unique element uniquely. Okay, so as I was saying, this particular text box, right? So it's a input class, right? So the type of this text box is input. Now, as you see here, right, you have got different properties, and out of these, if so, every time you are looking for an element, the first type of property or locator which you should look for is ID, right? So if an element has got a ID, in almost 99% of cases, that ID would be unique. There is no application where a ID could be not unique. So if you find a ID, that's the most fastest way of identifying an element, and also it's the best way of identifying an element if there is an ID. Okay, so in this case, if you see, we have got a locator or a property for this element, which is name equals to q, right? And if I have to find whether this is unique across the page, okay, so the developer tools also provide you with a find option through which you can actually type the XPath, right? And then you can find the element, whether it is unique or not. Also, what you can do is you can right click on this particular highlighted text, right, which is the element, and there you will find copy, right? So there you will find different options, and at the last you will see copy XPath and copy full XPath. Okay, so we'll understand what is XPath. It is again a type of locator, but right now, since I'm showing you how you can identify element, I am telling you that you can copy the XPath and copy the full XPath into your script, but that's not the way you should do it. But if you're not able to find any other way, then you can still go ahead and copy this and use it in your scripts. But that's not the ideal way. You should generally be either using your own locators or build your own XPath in most cases. Okay. Now, as I was saying, there is also a find, right? So press Control F on your keyboard, and then you will see there is a find text box which appears on the bottom of the page, right, on the Elements tab. So there you can see I can go ahead and copy or I mean paste the XPath which I have grabbed from here, or I can build my own XPath, right? So this is the XPath which was showing from the developer tools, right? As you can see, it is quite long, and also it's not kind of effective because it is going through all the different elements in this page. But I can also write my own XPath, right? So something like / input, right? And then at name equals to q. So it still does the job, right? You can see what the developer tool was returning me. It was quite a long XPath, and it was not reliable because there were a number of elements which could change in the page, right? So, but look at my XPath which I have built. It has just got a input tag, which is the input class, and inside the brackets, I am using this property at name equals to q, and it is uniquely able to identify this element. How you can say that? By looking at the right hand side where it is saying 1 of 1, which means it is unique across the page. If you see 1 of 2 or 1 of 3, that means there are multiple elements with this XPath, and then you need to basically adjust your XPath in order to bring this to 1 of 1, right? At that point of time, you could be sure that this is the unique XPath which you are using. Now, there are also tools which are available, which will give you the XPath and or other locators like CSS. There's something called Selectors Hub, which you can download it as a plugin. That will give you basically the selector for all your elements on the page. But if you want to practice on your own, right, if you want to understand how XPath is built, this is the best way of doing it. So building your own XPath for that particular element. If there is a ID or a name, you can directly use them. If there is no ID or name, then you can go ahead with the building your own XPath, or you can also build your CSS path. But this particular text box which is showing here, you can only find your elements uniquely by typing your XPath or pasting your XPath, right? So although I have talked a lot of different things here, which we'll be looking at in the later slides, but this is how you basically identify your elements on a browser like a Chrome or Firefox. So in earlier days, we also had used to have this Firefox plugins, which actually used to give us the XPath easily, right? But now I think they have discontinued it. So this is the way you can go ahead and find your elements on the page. And we'll see how this is important when we are writing our scripts as well. So now, since we are entering into Selenium, before that, let's complete this kind of project so that we can start writing some Selenium scripts going forward. So what are the things you require? So you require basically two things, right? So one is the Selenium Java dependency, and the other thing is the driver, the browser driver, which you are going to work on. These are the two basic things which are required for start automating or start writing automation scripts in Selenium. The other things which come into picture are obviously a basic test framework like JUnit or TestNG or Cucumber, which you can then integrate with your project if you want to write more specific scripts for any particular test framework, right? So let's go ahead and add the Selenium dependency, right? So Selenium, you can say Selenium Java Maven. Now you will see here there are different versions, as I was talking yesterday, that every software or every kind of dependency which you search in this Maven repository, which is the central repository, right? You can also see here it is written central, okay? And every software will have different versions which the development team is releasing, right, to this central repository. And all the versions will be listed here. Okay, it will also have a artifact ID as we were speaking, and it will also have uh, the group ID, right? So which is again something like the company domain. So here we can see the 4x beta, which is still in beta version. It's not still kind of finalized. You can say it is still in, they are performing some testing on this new version of Selenium. And always should prefer the latest or the stable versions of a particular software which you are going to use. So don't go for any alpha or beta because these are still in a development phase, you can say, right? They are making changes to these versions regularly, so it's better not to use them. Go for a stable version of any particular software. So here you can see the 3.14159, right? So this is the Selenium Java version, which is kind of stable right now. And if you see here, the group ID is org selenium hq.selenium. That's their company domain, right? The artifact ID, which is the project name, which is Selenium Java, and then the version. So this is how a Maven dependency is built and released into the central repository. Okay, so we need the dependency information in order to download all the libraries which are associated with this particular software. And once you go ahead and copy that, just paste it over under the dependencies tag, right? So all the dependencies which you require for your project should fall under this dependencies tag, okay? And whatever plugins we require, it will fall under this build and plugins tags, okay? So for now, I will remove these. We don't require these right now. Okay, so this is the dependencies, and then we require a browser driver, right? So this is the Chrome driver, right? And you will see there are different releases for Chrome driver as well. But whenever you are trying to use a particular browser driver, right? So you should always make sure that your browser driver version and the Chrome version matches. Otherwise, you will see that it is not able to launch the Chrome driver which you have downloaded because it may not be matching with your Chrome browser version. Okay, so both should be matching. You should not just go ahead with the latest version of the driver. Make sure it is matching with your browser version. So for me, it is right now on Chrome driver version 91. Okay, so if you go to that particular link, you will find the binaries here for Windows, for Mac, for Linux, right? Whichever machine you are working on, you can download that binary. So basically the zip file. Inside that zip file, you will find um, the executable which is present there. Okay, I think I already have that. If that is the latest version. So right now I'll be using it like this, but when we go into the project or framework mode, I will show you there is a kind of a library which allows you to add it as a dependency, and then it will manage your browser drivers automatically because the drivers keep on changing the versions. So it's not actually ideal to kind of use the browser driver directly in your project, but for learning purpose, you can do it, or else you can also use the dependency which we can add. I'll show you later, but right now let's see how we can do it this way. Okay. So I just copied my browser driver and I'm just going to paste it here. Right in the resources section, I have my Chrome driver.exe. Okay. Now, so that these are the two things which are the basic prerequisites before you write any particular script. Okay. Now let's go back to our slides. Okay, so let's look at all the different locators which are present in Selenium. Yeah, so talking about locators, there are different locators which are present in Selenium. As I talked about two locators, ID, name. I also gave you a brief idea about another locator, which is Xpath, right? So coming to the ID locator, right? As I said earlier, it is the most preferred way to locate any particular element on the page because it is considered to be unique all the time. Okay. Also, it is the most fastest and reliable way of locating any particular element because it is unique all the time. So anytime you see a ID, you should just grab it and use it for your element. You should not think twice about it. Okay. The next best possible locator is the name, right? Although it may not be unique across the page, but sometimes it could be unique as well. So after ID, this is considered the next best choice when you are trying to use a particular locator for Selenium. If there are multiple elements with the same name, WebDriver will perform action on the first matching element, right? So do remember that. Then there are two locators which are specifically for links on the page, okay, hyperlinks. So there is the link text and partial link text. So link text is type of locator which applies to all the hyperlinks on the page. And partial link text, it is similar to link text, but the only difference is you can partially mention the text which is present in the link and it will be able to identify that particular link, right? So both the locators use the text present on the links, right? So one you have to provide the full text, the other you can provide the partial text, whatever it is, right? Whichever you consider it is, it will be able to identify the element on the page. Okay, so if no, then the next type of locator is tag name. Okay, and this tag name is basically um, in the HTML tree. If you look, if I have shown you right, so this HTML tree, um, whatever type of element it is, that is basically the tag name. Okay, so you will see this is a input class. Similarly, for links, you will see it has got a tag, right? So these are the tags, and these are also called the tag name in locators. Okay, so if you are interacting with a link, then you can use the tag name a, right? But obviously it cannot be unique because there would be number of different links. So either you have to use a combination of tag name and some other locator, or sometimes if there is nothing else present and if you find that tag name is unique, you can also use this locator. Right, so the tags could be like input, button, or anchor, right? So these are different tags of the elements. Then there is another locator called class name. Okay, so class name, WebDriver can locate elements on a web page with their class name, and sometimes this could provide you with unique options, right? Sometimes the elements have got a unique class name. I've seen that in some applications. So at that time, you can also use the class name locator. Okay. Now, the next two locators are kind of the most important ones because in most projects you will see they would be falling back on these two locators, which are called Xpath and CSS Selector. The reason behind that is there are different, you can say, possibilities which are present when you are going with either the XPath or CSS Selector locator, right? So it provides you with different methods through which you can actually identify dynamic web elements on the page, right? So that's the biggest advantage when you are using locators like XPath or CSS Selector, right? It uses a path which is called the XPath expression to locate any element on the page. And there are two types of XPath. One is called the absolute XPath and one is called the relative XPath. Now we'll understand more about it when we go more deep into XPath in some of the other slides. So if I have to give a brief idea of what I'm talking about, right? So this locator which I prepared here for this text box, right? This was the relative XPath, and how you can identify it is when you see a double slash, right, at the beginning of the XPath. That means that is a relative XPath, which means it can start over from any point in this HTML tree. Okay. But when it is not a relative XPath, then you will see it has got a single slash. So if I have to inspect this element and if I have to copy the XPath, right, or the full XPath. So this full XPath is not the relative path. It is the full XPath of this particular element, which means it begins from this starting node and it will go through this tree to identify this particular element until it reaches here. So it will go through different elements on the page. So as you can see, it starts with single slash HTML body, right, which are the top elements on the page. Then it is going through different div elements, okay, and it is reaching the input. So this way also you can identify that particular element, but the disadvantage, the underlying elements could change anytime, right? So these divs or any other properties which you have used here, right? The tags which you have used, so these could change anytime, and hence it is not reliable. And hence we mostly fall back upon the relative XPath, right, which is much more flexible, and also it looks pretty simple when you are trying to create different web elements using different locators. Okay, so this is about relative and the non-relative, which is the absolute XPath. Okay, absolute means the full XPath and relative means the partial XPath. You can remember it like that. Now coming to the CSS selector, right? So this is again another type of locator which uses the CSS values in order to identify a particular element. Okay, so CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and it is basically the styling which is used in the pages, in the HTML pages, right, by the developers. So using this, we can also identify a particular element. So it basically combines an element selector and the selector value that can identify particular elements on a web page. We'll talk more about it when we look more deeper into the different methods which are used in CSS selectors. Okay, but do remember that these are the most commonly used locators when it comes to Selenium projects, XPath and CSS selector. Yes, sometimes we do use ID, but mostly it is XPath or CSS. Also, another major difference between these two is CSS selector is considered faster in some browsers, right? Although XPath is also much faster, but CSS selector is faster, considered to be faster in some browsers like the Internet Explorer. If you're working on Internet Explorer, you probably would be much more suited to use the CSS selector than XPath because it's considered to be much faster in that particular browser. Due to some reason, which I also don't know. Okay. So these were all the Selenium locators, and then we are going to jump on to the methods. So coming to now, let's have a look at all the basic Selenium WebDriver commands, right, which are present in Selenium WebDriver libraries. Okay, so these are the commands which you'll be using on a regular basis when you're working on a project. So it's better to have a good understanding of all these different commands or methods. Okay, so the first method which is used in Selenium WebDriver, it is to open any web page URL, right? So there are two methods, get and navigate to, but get will open a new web page URL, yet navigate to, it is mostly used, you can also use this to open a web page, but this is mostly used when you want to change, if you have already opened a page, right, and you want to move to a specific URL, then that time you basically could use this navigate to method. But if you're trying to open a brand new web page URL on your scripts, then probably go for the get method. Okay. Next, there are other navigate methods which are present in your browsers, right? So if you have seen in the browser, right? So here, if I go to a particular link, and now I can, sorry. Okay, now you can see there are forward and back buttons, right? And there is a refresh button. So these are all emulated by these methods, which are the navigate methods. Okay, these are emulated in the browsers also, which is the navigate back, navigate to, forward, right? And then the navigate to, which means it is going to this page, and then navigate dot refresh, which refreshes this page or reload this page. So all of these actions, browser actions, are emulated in this browser methods, sorry, in this navigate methods, right? Present in Selenium WebDriver. You can see navigate to, navigate forward, navigate back, navigate refresh. Okay. So forward, it navigates the browser forward by one page. Back, it will go back to the previous page, and refresh, it will reload the current web page. So if you want to perform such actions on your web page, then use these navigate methods. Okay, then some useful methods to kind of perform some validations on your web page, like the get title. If you want to fetch the title of the current page and validate whether the title is matching the expected title, go for the get title method. Get current URL, it fetches you the current URL of the web page, right? If you want to perform some validation that you have reached some page and you want to verify whether it is the expected page, you can use this method to get current URL and it will return you the URL. Then you can validate against the expected URL. Okay. Then get page source. So this is basically useful if you want to find any particular text on the source, on the source code, right? So this HTML source code which you are looking at, right? So this is the complete source code of this particular page. So when you use get page source, it is going to return you the source code of the web page, and then you can maybe put some validation there that some particular text is present in that source code. So that kind of validation you can put after you get the get page source, which will return it into a string, and then you can basically find that particular text within the string, right? It's not the ideal way of validating a page, but sometimes it may be useful. Then the two normal commands to basically close your browsers, right? So one is the close method, which will close the current window, which is controlled by the WebDriver, and the other is quit, which will close all the browsers, or basically it will quit the WebDriver, right? So whatever driver it has started, whichever windows it has opened, it will basically shut down everything. So if you want to do a clean sweep of or a clean close, you should always use the quit command, not the close command, because close command will only close the current window. Okay. Okay. Some more commands here, right? So the clear command. This command is basically used with text boxes whenever you are trying to clear any existing text which is present on the text box. Okay. Any pre-entered text before you kind of enter any new text into the field. If you want to clear out that field, you can use this clear command. Okay. Then send keys command. This method simulates typing into an element which may set its value. It's basically entering some text into the text box. Okay. So send keys command, you can use that. You can also use the send keys command to press any key from the keyboard, right? So you have to pass the keys dot enter, keys dot tab, or whatever key you want to press on the keyboard. You can use the keys send keys method along with the keys class, right? Followed by the specific key on the keyboard which you want to press. Then there is click command, which simulates the click event, which means basically clicking, doing a mouse click on any particular element. Okay, it could be a link, it could be a text box. You can click on all the elements. Okay. Then there are some commands through which you can perform some validations on your elements. Okay. Before you actually perform some action, you can check whether the element is displayed on the page, whether it is enabled on the page, or if it is a checkbox, a select option, or radio button. You can also use is selected. That means it will check if the element is already selected on the page or not, right? Now, this will be useful if you are trying to check whether the element is present on the page before you want to click or enter some text into that element. Okay. Or if you're working with checkbox, you can check whether it is already selected. If not, then only select that checkbox, right? So these are useful methods whenever you're trying to write any particular scripts. Then submit, it is, you can say it's a kind of click method only, but it is only applicable for a form, right? So when you are working on forms like the login form, right? So there is a login button or a submit button there. So either you can click on that submit button or you can submit the complete form. using this submit method. Okay. Um, the next methods, the get text and get tag name, again used for validations. So if you want to fetch any particular text of a particular element, it is the get text method. If you want to get the tag name of the element, you can use get tag name, right? So this could be useful when you are trying to validate any particular text of a particular element. Okay. So we have discussed few methods. Let's go ahead and write some scripts, right? So that we get an idea of how they are used in a real time. For now, I will just for demonstration purpose, I will just write some simple straightforward class and methods. Later on, we'll see how we actually write the code in a framework and in a project like scenario, right? So let's see what we'll name this. Okay, so let's say examples. Okay, so first we need to make sure that our Maven dependency, which we have downloaded or which we have included in our POM, has actually downloaded the dependency, right? Sometimes it doesn't do it on its own. So go to your right click on your project, go to Maven and click on reload project. So then you will see that it will perform some background tasks. So basically it is going to download the libraries, right? So let's see. Okay, so there is some issue here. Okay, so sometimes you need to do it multiple times, right? Once your dependency is downloaded, you can verify it at different places. So look for in the external libraries, you will see all the different libraries dependencies will be downloaded here. Also, you can go to the right click, sorry, on the right hand side, you will see Maven, right? And here you will find all the different lifecycle phases. You can directly run it from here. You will find the plugins, the default plugins or plugins which you have defined, and also the dependencies which you have declared, right? So this is the Selenium Java dependency, and you will see all the related dependencies are also downloaded, right? So for all the browser drivers and all the related dependencies with the Selenium Java library. So all of these are downloaded. Now coming back to our project, right? So here, so first, the first step of writing any particular script is to set the system property for the Chrome driver or the Selenium driver, right? So system.setProperty. Here you will mention which kind of driver you are using. So I'm currently using the Chrome driver, right? And then we need to pass the driver path here. So currently it is under source test resources. And you also need to mention the complete path, which includes the Chrome driver.exe. So this will set the system property for this particular driver, which is present in our project. Once it is done, we can then use the WebDriver class to create a driver object, right? So in this case, we'll be using the Chrome driver. If you're using any other browser, you can also create that. So once you get the driver object, right, which is the driver instance, this will basically open up a new Chrome driver. Okay. Once you do that, then you can use all the different methods which are present in Selenium. Okay. So the first method which we discussed is the get method. And this is, as I said, is used to get or to open a new web page URL. Okay. So let's see which one we can use. Throughout this training, I'll be using different demo websites. Obviously, for the project, I'll be using a specific application, but for other scripts, I'll be using different sites to kind of show you the different scenarios which you can handle using Selenium. Okay. Okay, so this is one of the demo websites provided by Source Labs. Okay, it is basically a simple login form where you can pass the username, password, click on login button, and then it will take you to a inventory page. Okay, so let's use this for writing some simple scripts using different web methods. Okay, so this is my URL, and I can directly pass it in the driver.get method. So this will open up a new page for the application which I have specified. Okay. Now, so what were our other methods? Let's look. So there is navigate methods, right? There is get title. So let's see this. So if I want to get the title of the page, right? So I can use driver dot get title. Now this is going to return me a string value. So I should be storing it in a string, right? Or I can directly print it out as well. So let's see what is this title. Okay. So this is the title, and this is where we are printing the title. Now let's go ahead and execute this. Okay, so the title is printed here, which is Swag Labs. Now, if you want to perform a validation, you can do it through Java as well. Okay, I will show you both the ways. So if what I'm talking about, right, I can use a if condition to basically validate this particular title. So I can say title dot equals swag labs, right? Then say page title is correct. Else. Okay, this way. So here I have not used any framework. I have used just the default Java language in order to perform some validation on my title. So this is one way of doing it, although it's not the ideal way of doing it, but still it, this will also do the validation on the particular element, right? So once I go into the page, I can perform a validation and print some text, whether the validation is correct or not. So this is one way of doing it. Now the other way of doing it, let's go ahead and add another dependency, which is for JUnit, right? So let's look at JUnit, how we can use JUnit as a test framework to perform simple validations. Okay, for this, I will pick up the latest version. Okay, generally, I do remove this scope, which is present in this test frameworks. The reason, if I'm trying to run it with Maven, if I keep this scope as test, right, it will only run in the test phase. It won't run if I'm trying to use some other build phase from Maven. Obviously, it will not be a problem if I execute it directly, but still, as a precaution, I always remove this, right? So that I don't forget it later and then it won't actually run the test if I am running any different build phase. Okay, once you do that, again, go to Maven and reload the project just to make sure it is downloaded correctly. Okay, so once it's done, now let's see how we can do the same validation using um, JUnit or JUnit test framework, right? So for this, we can use something like assert, right? So this assert is a kind of framework which basically does your validations, which is also called assertions, right? So these type of assertions are present in every framework like TestNG or JUnit, which you can use for validation purpose. Okay, perform validations on your tests. So there are different assert methods which we can use here. So we'll use assert true. In assert true, we need to pass a Boolean condition. So I will say title dot equals swag labs. Okay, so this is, as you can see, it is much more efficient and it's much more readable because it's just one line of code compared with 4 lines of code when we write it in Java. And hence that is the reason we use test frameworks in our code when we are doing automation, because it provides us with a lot of flexibility, and also it provides us with inbuilt methods which you can use for validations. And do remember, never write any code without any validation, because then your automation is kind of half complete, right? Because without validation, there is no meaning of just going through all the pages using your automation script. Every point you should put some kind of validation, right? Whatever script you're writing, whatever test you're writing, do not forget to write some validation for that particular expected output. Okay. So now if I run this, you won't see any output here on the console if it passes, right? Because it is just performing the validation. It is doing nothing else. Obviously, if we pass some message in the assert methods, then it will show. If that assert fails, then it will show it on the console. If it passes, it won't show anything. Okay. Okay. Now if I, so this is one part of JUnit where you can perform assertions, right? Now the other part of JUnit is, so it provides you with different annotations. Okay. Now these annotations are basically used to kind of drive your testing or your unit testing, right? So there is an annotation called at test, right? And this basically converts your code into a test method. Now the advantage of this is you don't actually require this executable method, which is the main method. You can also run your test without this main method, right? So test method is itself an executable method. So once you use this annotation at test, you can directly use test methods in your classes, right? So something like if I say here, get, what should I say? So validate title, right? So this is one test method you can say. And what I can do is I can write my code inside this. Okay. obviously this will the test code which actually validates my title, right? So I will write it inside this test method. Okay, and I can directly execute it. You can see a play button showing which is run test. Okay, now there are other annotations like at, before. So inside this, I can basically put my configuration. Okay, so again, I will say public void setup, right? So this will perform the setup steps, which is basically to set up my Chrome driver and then also open my web page, right? Now I can declare it in outside this class so that it is this could be used across all the methods. Okay.
So means main is not required vision here then.
No, because these are test methods, right? You're not writing any Java application. You're not building a Java application where you require a main method, right? In Java applications, you require a main method, but if you are writing test, you generally don't require the main method because the test methods are itself executable, and that is the advantage which is provided by your test framework. It basically allows you to reorganize your tests, your code in a way that it is more readable, right? These tests are more readable. As you can see, it is inside a test method. So you can have hundreds of methods like this. And every time you don't require that main method to drive your execution, you can drive it from the test framework itself. Right. Although I was running with the WebDriver methods, but I entered into JUnit. So let's also look at some other annotations which are present here, right? So this before annotation, it is run before every test. Okay. So this is the test method which will be executed. And if I write at before, this code will be executed always before it executes any particular test. That is the flow of this particular execution, right? So it will first execute this code, then this code, and then there's also at after annotation, which will be executed after the test is executed. Okay, so I can see here close. And then the advantage of this is reorganizing your code, right? And also putting a certain execution flow to your test, right? So you want to make sure that the setup is complete before you run your test, and then the setup is closed after you run every test, right? So this would be your flow. Now I can directly run this particular example, which is again a JUnit. And as you can see, now it went in the flow, right? So first it executed, it created this driver, opened the driver, opened a new page, it performed the test, and then it closed the test or the web page it has opened, right? Using the driver.quit method. So similar annotations are present in test-ng as well. We will look at it when we go through the test-ng sessions. But this is a basic understanding of how annotations work and how a test framework works when you are using it within your scripts. Okay, let's look at some other methods which we have learned. So we looked at some. Let's look at this send keys, clear, click, right? Let's look at these methods, how we can use them. So let me write another test here. And I will say public void validate login. Right. So I will write the logic here to kind of validate my login process, okay, of this application, which is entering username, password, clicking on login, going to another page, validating something there, right? So the first step is to inspect the username field to find any particular ID or any unique property. So in this case, it is ID. We have got a ID. We have also got a name. We can use either of them. Both are unique. Or we can also use the Xpath here. OK. So what we'll do here is we'll use driver dot find element, okay, by dot ID, and we'll paste the ID here. As you can see, it is asking you to import the by class package, right? So import that. So once you are able to identify this element using the by.id locator, then you need to perform some action on this. So in this case, we can use the send keys, right, which sends a character sequence. So whatever text you type here, it will pass the characters one by one into this text field. Okay. So what is the username here? We have got the username here. Similarly, we will do it for password. So we'll grab the password here. We'll do send keys and then the value, which is this value, and password. We have got ID as password, so we can use that. Okay, so this is how you do a send keys to type any text, but you can also use the clear method if you want to be just to be sure that there is no pre-entered text in the text fields, and it's always preferable to use this method before you enter any text into a particular text box, because that will make sure that it will clear out all the text which is any pre-entered text before you enter your own text into the page. Although it should not be there, but sometimes some web pages do store some cache memory through which it can pre-enter some text, right? So better to clear it out. Similarly for password, and we can use the clear method. Okay. Now, in order to click on a button, we can use the click method. We have got a ID for this button. So we'll say driver dot find element by dot ID dot click. Sorry, dot click. Right. So once it enters the username, password, and clicks on the button. So let's see the scenario in this application, how it behaves, and what kind of validation we can put for this application, right? So it goes into this page, as you can see, which is a products page. Okay. Now, if I'm performing a login operation, I should always make sure that the resulting page, which is the home page here, is the expected page. Now, there are different ways of validating this, right? I can validate it with some text, some unique product which is displayed on the page, the title of the page, the URL of the page. So I can validate a lot of things, right? So let's see if it has got some different title here. So I can find it. So it has got the same title as the home page or the login page. So it's not a good idea to use it, right? So I can also use the page URL, right? So we have got a method for this. So what I can say is string URL equals to driver dot get current URL. Okay, and then I can use a assert method here. Let's use something else. So I will use assert equals, and here I have to pass the string message followed by what is expected and actual. Okay, expected values and actual values. So let's see what we want to verify here, right? So expected is this and the actual is this. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so all the validations are passed and that's why it is showing it as pass. If it is any failure in the validation, it will fail the test. Okay. And as you can see, I can run individual test without running even the class. I can directly run it from the test. Okay, so we have seen clear, send keys, click. We have seen we haven't seen get text is displayed. Okay, so let's see these methods as well. Now, if I want to click on this login button and I want to verify whether it is displayed on the page before clicking, right? So for that, I can do driver.find element. Again, use the same locator here. Dot is displayed. Okay, and I can put if condition here because it is going to return me true or false, right? So what I can say, if this button is displayed, then only click on this. So this is how you can use the is displayed method. You can also use the is enabled method here, right? So you can use either of them based on your particular scenario. Okay. So that is how you use is displayed and is enabled. We'll see selected when we interact with any checkbox or select buttons. Then get text and get tag name, right? So how do you get a text of a particular element, right? So let's see this application. Or let's log out of this. Okay, let's try to grab the text of this button. Okay, whether it is login or not. So for that, let's go here and we will say string btn text equals to again the locator for the login button dot get dot get text. Okay, so this will return you the text and you can always validate, put a validation again here, assert equals btn text dot equals, you can put login. Just a minute. What I have, okay. Sorry, I used assert equals. I should use assert true. Okay, run your test. Okay, so whenever your assertion fails, you will see something like this assertion error, right? Whenever your assertion fails with whatever you have written. So it is telling me that the assertion which I have written is not correct. It is not. So the button text which is returning, it's not equal to login. Okay, and do you know why? Because this login is in uppercase and I have written it in some other case.
Uh-huh.
So change it to login. Now see, even though I thought that this test is correct, right? Whatever I have written, but as you can see, when you put validations in place, then only you can actually verify that your automation is running correctly or not, right? So that is the importance of putting validations around your tests, because sometimes developers might change whatever they are writing, right? So again, it failed. So let's see what is wrong here. I'll just try to print out what is the value here. Okay, so probably it is not able to get the text of this particular button. It is returning null, and that's why it is not printing anything here, right? And hence the assertion is failing. Now, do remember that you will not get text. I mean, you cannot use the get text method on every element, okay, on the page. It's not the case. It will only work whenever there is a text attribute for that particular element. Otherwise, the get text method will not work. You have to use some other methods, which I will talk about. Something called get attribute, which can basically get the attribute value of any particular property. Okay. So get text will only work with certain elements, not all the elements. Okay, whenever you see an element like this, right? Something which is the text is written inside a tag, right? So that you can say that it is the display text on the element, and then the get text might work in these kind of cases. Yeah, whenever you see some text is present inside your elements that time. Okay, so let's try this out. I hope it works. So in this case, as you can see, there is nothing else for this element. There is a dev class. There is no other attribute which I can use. Obviously, I can use Xpath, but I think the class is also a unique attribute for this particular element. So I can use the class name here, okay, to identify this particular element. And then I want to grab the text which is present for this particular element, which is password for all users. Okay. So let's try this out. So password text. So we'll use driver dot find element by dot class name. Let's use another locator here, and we'll use the value here. Okay, but do keep in mind that we are not going after this particular element. There is also a h4 tag inside which the text is present, right? So you cannot directly go from class till the h4. If you want to navigate like this, you have to probably use the XPath here. Okay, so let's try it that way. So class or dev add class, okay, slash h4. So this is how you construct your XPath. Okay, so take the element which has got a kind of unique attribute, right? So start from there so that it is able to identify it on this HTML tree. So once it identifies and reaches here, then I can easily navigate to the child element. Okay, so which is the h4 tag which I want to inspect, or which I want to get the text of. So I can use this XPath. So instead of class name, we are going to use XPath. Okay, and then I will use get text here. And let's see if it is matching. We have to put this particular text in the validation. Sorry, not that text, this text.
Yeah, password.
Yeah. Okay, now it will match because if I have already printed the text, which is password for all users, which is the same text which we are trying to grab, right? Okay, so now the validation is passed. So I hope this is clear why we could not use class name directly to identify the element, because we were trying to get the text of the next element, which is a child element of this particular class, which is login password class. Okay, so in order to grab this child element, I have to use XPath because I have to navigate through the parent and the child class.